"You're the biggest failure in this family." My father sneered at me in front of the whole family. "You were a mistake." Then my grandfather stood up, slammed his cane on the floor, and said, "Enough. It's time you all learned the truth." The truth he revealed stunned everyone. The dinner table fell silent, not because of the roast chicken my mother had spent hours preparing or the flickering candles that made everything feel too formal. No, it was because of what my father had just spat across the table. "You're the biggest failure in this family," he said, his voice thick with disgust. "You were a mistake." His words landed like blows. Everyone sat frozen, my cousins too stunned to chew. My aunt dropped her fork. Even my brother, always the golden child, shifted in his seat, but said nothing. I sat at the far end of the table, not because there was no space, but because they always made sure there wasn't any near them. I blinked once, then twice, holding back the sting in my eyes. I would not give them my tears. Not this time. The only sound was the soft clink of my grandfather's cane tapping the floor beside his chair. Tap tap tap. And then slam. The old man, now nearing 90, but still fierce in presence, stood up, so suddenly even the dog beneath the table whimpered. His cane smacked the marble floor like a judge's gavel, making everyone jump. "Enough," he thundered, voice echoing through the lavish dining room. "It's time you all learn the truth." My father opened his mouth to retort, but Granddad cut him off with a raised hand. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. "You all think she's a mistake?" he said, eyes scanning each face. "You think she's the failure?" He pointed his cane right at me. "That girl is the only one in this room who reminds me of what this family once stood for. The only one who still carries the legacy I built with these hands." A crack of silence followed. Then, he turned to me. "Child, tell them what you told me last week." I hesitated, heart pounding, hands trembling in my lap. I hadn't meant for anyone else to know, but he nodded at me gently, and something in his eyes told me this was my moment. My voice was weak. I cleared my throat. "I saved the family business from collapse. 3 months ago, I didn't tell anyone. I bought out the debt under a different name." Gasps. My uncle leaned forward. My father stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. "I didn't do it for recognition," I continued. "I did it because it meant something to me. Because Grandpa's work means something to me." The weight of that confession sat in the air. My father's voice broke the silence, hoarse now. "That's not possible. You don't even—" "I taught her," Grandpa said sharply, "for the past 2 years. Every weekend. Business, contracts, negotiation. While you were all too busy pretending she didn't exist, she was learning how to lead." And just like that, the room shifted. My cousin pushed his plate away. My brother was pale. My mother sat frozen, mouth parted in disbelief. I looked down at my plate, barely touched. For the first time in years, the silence was mine. But the story was only beginning. Because what my grandfather said next was a truth that would leave them all shattered. And I hadn't seen any of it coming. My grandfather reached into the inside pocket of his worn, gray blazer, the same one he always wore to family events but nobody ever respected him for. With deliberate hands, he pulled out a folded, slightly yellowed envelope and placed it on the table. He didn't say anything. Just slid it across the polished surface until it stopped in front of my father. "What's this?" My father scoffed, still trying to claw back some control. "More of your—" "Open it." Grandfather's voice was quiet now. Not loud, not angry, but somehow more powerful than any scream. The air felt electric. My father reluctantly opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was handwritten. My grandfather's cursive, neat and careful. I saw my father's eyes widen with each word he read. His hands, once clenched in arrogance, now trembled slightly. "I wrote this 25 years ago," Grandpa said, turning his gaze to the rest of the table. "When your mother was pregnant with her second child, you all assumed the child was an accident, a mistake. But it was no accident." I froze. He looked at me then, not with sadness, but with a fierceness I didn't know he still had. "She was the child I begged them to have." Gasps echoed. "I was dying then," he continued. "Or so I thought. Doctors gave me months, asked them to give me something to live for. A legacy. They had you, son." He nodded at my father. "But I asked for one more. A child who wouldn't grow up entitled. A child raised humbly, away from all this noise. Someone who could carry forward the values this family has long forgotten. You were born 6 months later," he said, turning to me. "And the day I held you in my arms, my condition reversed." He laughed under his breath. "They called it a miracle. I call it a second chance." My mouth parted. My chest tightened. "You never told me this," I whispered. "Because it wasn't time," he said, his eyes glistening. "But it is now." The entire table was stunned into silence. Even my mother's usual resting smug face was now unreadable. My brother's smirk had vanished completely. My father looked like he'd swallowed fire. So you planned this? I prayed for her, Grandpa snapped. And I kept praying. I watched you all push her aside, humiliate her, underestimate her. I said nothing because I wanted to see if her spirit would break. His voice cracked now, raw with emotion. But it didn't. She stayed kind. She stayed strong. Even when you called her names. Even when she worked jobs beneath her. Even when she sat at this table like a ghost. He turned to me. I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I shook my head. No, you were always there in your own way. And suddenly, it wasn't just my father who looked ashamed. My cousins stared at their plates. My uncle's lips moved as if wanting to speak, but nothing came. But it wasn't over. Because the truth? That letter? That was only one part of what had been buried. There was still something even I didn't know. Something that would change everything. My grandfather took a long breath, steadying himself on his cane before slowly lowering back into his chair. The weight of what he'd revealed still hung heavy in the air. You could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the nervous clink of someone's spoon against china. But he wasn't done. There's something else, he said softly. Something none of you know. He looked across the room, to the cabinet in the corner, the one we all thought was just for dusty photo albums and forgotten war medals. Bring me the black folder, he said. My younger cousin obeyed without a word. Moments later, the thick leather folder was placed on the table. Grandpa opened it slowly, revealing pages of neatly clipped legal documents. This, he said, laying it flat, is my will. My father's face paled. You already have a will. We all saw it last year. No, Grandpa replied. You saw the one I wanted you to see. The real one was updated 6 months ago. Why? My aunt whispered. Why would you hide that from us? He didn't answer her. He turned to me. I made changes the day she saved the company. My heart skipped. You mean? Yes, he said. You're the sole heir now. The table erupted. My uncle stood. That's absurd. My aunt gasped. She's not even qualified. My brother shouted, she's a waitress. But, my grandfather slammed his palm on the table. Enough. She's the only one who deserves it. I watched each of you squander opportunity after opportunity. You used my name for credit for status, but none of you ever earned it. He turned to my father, eyes sharp. You taught your daughter shame. I taught her strength, and now she will carry this name forward. I sat frozen, the words not yet sinking in. Me? The heir? The one they said didn't belong? You made me executor of the fake will, my father growled. I made her executor of the real one, Grandpa snapped. You just didn't know. My father's fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing, because deep down, he knew he had lost. Still, I wasn't gloating. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt whole. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, valued. Like I hadn't lived in the shadows for nothing. But, even as I tried to process it all, my grandfather looked at me with a glint in his eye. There's one more thing I need to show you, he said. And that's when he reached beneath his chair and pulled out a small wooden box. The same box I once saw him crying over, years ago, when he thought no one was watching. And what was inside that box would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. The old wooden box creaked open in my grandfather's trembling hands. It looked ordinary on the outside. Plain wood, no locks, no carvings. But I knew better. I remembered being 8, wandering into a study, seeing that box half opened, and catching a glimpse of photos and letters before he shut it fast and told me gently, one day, you'll understand. That day had finally come. He set the open box on the table in front of me. Go on, he nodded. This belongs to you. I hesitated, my fingers brushing over the lid. Inside, there were letters tied in faded twine, yellowed photographs, and a small velvet pouch. I took the first letter and unfolded it. My mother's handwriting. I glanced up, startled. She was looking at her plate, her face unreadable. The letter was addressed to my grandfather, written the day I was born. I don't know if I'm ready for this, it read. I'm scared, but she has your eyes, Papa, and your fire. If I fail, please raise her right. Not to be rich, not to be perfect, but to be kind. My throat tightened. Beneath that were photos. Me at age 5, holding Grandpa's hand outside the grocery store. Me with paint on my cheeks during a school art competition. Me asleep on his chest while he read some dusty old book. He had kept everything. I never showed these to anyone, he said quietly. They would have laughed, mocked you more, but I kept them. Because every time you smiled through their cruelty, I saw hope. I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a gold pendant, tiny, delicate, engraved with one word, legacy. My hands trembled. You gave this to Grandma, I whispered. He nodded. And now I give it to you. I looked up, eyes blurry. Why me? Because you listened. You learned. You never took shortcuts. You never needed praise or money to do what was right. And that's what leadership is. Across the table, the silence was no longer contemptuous. It was uncomfortable. Shameful. But I didn't want revenge. Not really, that wasn't the point. I stood up. Took a deep breath. Grandpa's will stands. That's not changing. But I'm not kicking anyone out. I'm not taking anyone's house or business titles. Everyone blinked. Even Grandpa looked surprised. I'm not here to punish you, I said, eyes locking with my father's. I just want you to know, I didn't fail. You did. You failed to see me. And that's a burden you can carry. Then I turned to Grandpa, but I see you. And I'll protect what you built. Not just the business, the heart of it. He smiled then. A small, proud, bittersweet smile. And in that moment, the weight I had carried for decades slipped off my shoulders. But even as I thought the storm had passed, Grandpa cleared his throat. One more thing, he said softly. Before I go. He reached into the box again and pulled out an old, sealed envelope. This isn't about money, he said. It's about blood. And what was written in that letter would explain why my father always hated me. The envelope looked older than the rest. Its edges were brittle. The seal faded but still intact. My grandfather held it gently in his weathered hands, like it contained a heartbeat. This, he said, was never meant to be opened unless absolutely necessary. Then he looked me dead in the eyes. And, tonight is that moment. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding in my chest. Every eye in the room was on us. No one moved. No one spoke. My father's face had gone ghost white. My mother sat rigid, like she already knew what was inside. With a slow breath, Grandpa opened the envelope and pulled out a single page. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. He began to read aloud. To my beloved father, if you're reading this, then the secret I carried with me all these years must now see the light. The truth is, the child I gave birth to on that cold November night was not James' daughter. She is someone else's. Gasps erupted around the table. My breath hitched. My stomach dropped. He was kind, gentle. A man I met before the marriage was arranged. We only had a few weeks, but I never forgot him. And when I found out I was pregnant, I knew it wasn't James. I was scared, but I was also certain that this child would be my redemption. A new beginning. The room was spinning. Grandpa looked up at my father. She's not your biological daughter. My father stood abruptly, chair screeching. Lies. You expect me to believe this now? After all this time? Grandpa didn't flinch. I had the DNA test done last month. Quietly, I needed to know before I gave her everything. He handed the sealed lab report across the table. My father stared at it like it might burn him. You hated her, Grandpa said, voice cracking, because somewhere deep down you knew. But none of that matters now, because blood isn't what makes someone family. Choice does. My mother finally spoke, voice barely a whisper. I loved him, but I stayed for the sake of this family. I never told her because I didn't want her to feel like less. I stood slowly. My knees were weak, but my voice didn't falter. I never needed to be your daughter, I said to my father. I just wanted to be a part of this family. I gave everything I had for it, even when you gave me nothing. He didn't respond. His pride was crumbling, but he couldn't say a word. I turned back to Grandpa. What do I do now? I asked. He looked at me, eyes filled with love and gravity. You lead, he said. You heal. And you build a future that's better than our past. And I did. In the weeks that followed, I took the reins of the company, not with vengeance, but with vision. I brought in programs to help struggling employees. I started scholarships in Grandma's name. And slowly, the family that once mocked me began to see me. My father never apologized. But one day, he left a note on my desk. You've done more for this name than I ever did. Maybe that's what scares me the most.